Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The security company G4S has suspended 9 workers at an immigration removal centre near Gatwick Airport for allegedly abusing detainees. It follows an investigation by the BBC's Panorama programme, claiming officers mocked and assaulted people. It's claimed there was widespread self-harm and attempted suicides at the centre and that drug use was rife. G4S says it's aware of the allegations and immediately began an investigation. Those suspended include a female nurse, 6 detention custody officers and 2 managers. Alison Holt has more.
Brook House Immigration Removal Centre sits a couple of hundred metres from the runway at Gatwick Airport. It's run by the global security firm G4S. Here, foreign national prisoners facing deportation at the end of their sentence are detained alongside asylum seekers, illegal migrants and those who've overstayed their visas. Covert filming by the BBC's Panorama programme shows a chaotic place awash with drugs, with self-harm commonplace amongst the men held there. There are officers doing their best, but the undercover investigation alleges some staff mock, abuse or even assault detainees. The incidents picked up by the hidden camera worn by another officer.
21 years old, I work at the Immigration Removal Centre. I'm also working for the BBC as an undercover reporter.
Callum Tully has worked at Brook House for 2 years.
There's a culture of violence at Brook House. When I started working there, I was just quite quickly became just disturbed by what I was seeing and hearing about.
It's the latest scandal to hit G4S. Last year, another Panorama investigation at Medway Secure Training Centre in Kent led to allegations of the mistreatment of some teenagers held there. The company says it's waiting to see the Brook House footage, but has suspended 9 staff and put 5 others on restricted duties.
My initial reaction is I'm absolutely disgusted by the alleged behaviour. It's totally unacceptable to me, to the organisation, to anyone else who would work in this kind of vocation.
What does that tell you about the culture of Brook House, but also the culture of G4S, because culture comes from on high?
My expectations are very clear, that we care for people, we look after people, on occasion we challenge people, and we do that in a way that is accepted, that is clearly laid down.
It's the Home Office that decides who is detained at centres like Brook House. It says it condemns any actions that put the safety or dignity of detainees at risk, adding that G4S needs to ensure there is a thorough investigation into the allegations at the centre. The company says it has alerted the police.
Alison, this Panorama investigation, it raises several issues, not just about alleged abuse, but also about the detention of those involved in immigration cases.
Absolutely. Well, on Monday we will see the full allegations, and I'm sure there will be many points that arise from that. But in terms of the general points, when you have a place like Brook House, like centres holding people waiting for deportation across the country, you have a mix of foreign national offenders, people who've reached the end of their prison sentence, often hardened criminals, alongside people who have overstayed visas. They may not have been in trouble for anything other than immigration offences. You add in drugs, self-harm and the desperation of people, and you have a toxic mix. Now, Brook House and other such centres were built to house people for 72 hours, so just a few days ready for their departure out of the country. Well, the average length of stay, according to the inspectors at Brook House at the moment, is 48 days. There are some people who have been there for more than 2 years. And if you look across the detention estate, these other immigration removal detention places, the latest figures show that there is one person who has been in a centre for about 4 years. So all of this raises very serious questions about how well this system is working at the moment.
OK. Alison, many thanks. Alison Holt.
G4S got their response in early. They were alerted in advance to Panorama's investigation into a detention centre near Gatwick in accordance with the usual rules about the way programmes like this operate, and they've acted before transmission, suspending 9 members of staff. Well, our Home Affairs correspondent Danny Shaw is with me. What can you tell me about the programme's conclusions?
Well, this results from covert filming by a worker at Brook House, immigration removal centre near Gatwick Airport, and he'd initially approached the Panorama programme. And according to the programme, the footage reveals chaos, incompetence and abuse, which it describes as a toxic mix. It says there's filming which shows staff mocking the detainees who are held at the centre, abusing them, threatening violence and assaulting them. The employee also says that he witnessed widespread self-harm among detainees and drug use.
We, of course, wait for the full details on Monday, and we'll hear from G4S in a moment or two. But this is not the first time they have been, as it were, in the spotlight on this kind of thing.
Well, certainly not. This has echoes of undercover filming at the Medway Secure Training Centre just over 18 months ago, in which it was alleged that staff had ill-treated children who were held there. That was very disturbing, some of that footage, and it led to a number of disciplinary proceedings and criminal proceedings, which are still, in fact, going on. And then if you look further back, also G4S has been in the spotlight before the Olympics, when it was unable to get the staff for security. And also, we had the riot at Birmingham Prison, which it operates. It always seems that every few months there's a story involving G4S, and it is still subject to an investigation by the Serious Fraud Office over its tagging contract, its contract to electronically monitor offenders in the community, because it was overcharging the government.
It's a huge company. What are the implications of this for it, do you think?
Well, it's a serious blow to the company in terms of its reputation, particularly in the UK, because it was trying to rebuild its reputation after the Medway scandal. It's also a terrible blow for staff, for the very many numbers of staff who act professionally. It's not good for them. And it also has implications for the contract to run Brook House. G4S has operated Brook House since 2009. It's one of 3 bidders who are currently trying to win control again of Brook House. That contract is up for renewal, and certainly when the Home Office comes to decide that, it is very likely that it will come under pressure not to re-award the contract to G4S given these further revelations. And I think it also raises further questions about the company's suitability to manage criminal justice and immigration facilities. It currently still runs Oak Hill Secure Training Centre. It also operates 5 prisons in England and Wales, but there are now question marks over its operation in the immigration removal sector.
Danny, very many thanks. Jerry Petherwick is the Managing Director of G4S Custodial and Detention Services and is in the studio. Thank you for coming in.
Good afternoon.
You clearly take this very seriously. You haven't completed your investigations, but you clearly think that they're onto something.
The moment we received the letter from BBC Panorama, we reviewed it and we took the decision, because of the seriousness of a number of the allegations, to suspend 9 staff and remove others from frontline duties. We also referred it immediately to the local police and safeguarding agencies, as we would do in any instance. It isn't because it's BBC Panorama. Any allegation of this type would result in similar behaviour.
All very virtuous and proper, people will say, I'm sure. But the question arises of why it took an outside agency to find out that this kind of thing was going on.
Well, I think the fact is that we at Brook House, and indeed wherever we operate, we're very much under scrutiny. There are embedded...
As you should be.
Absolutely right. I certainly support that comment. We've got embedded Home Office officials. We have the Independent Inspectorate of Prisons. We've got Independent Monitoring Board. I visit, other people visit. And so the question immediately is this the norm or is it abhorrent and unusual behaviour? Now, with all of those people visiting, viewing, my reviewing of data and so forth, I don't believe this is normal behaviour.
Well, except as we've just heard Danny outline, you have form in this regard. There is a history of detainees of one kind and another being treated very badly, in this case apparently mocked, assaulted. That suggests that it's not that abnormal within your company.
I still believe it is abnormal. It's despicable, it's disgraceful. Well, after Medway, we undertook some work. We've carried on that work. It's my job to drive the expected behaviours within my area of responsibility, the prisons and so forth. And so I take personal accountability and responsibility for doing that. I will be redoubling my efforts because this is absolutely unacceptable.
What this suggests is that whatever you've done since Medway wasn't enough, doesn't it?
There's a question that, is it ever enough? Because if you look worldwide, prison commentators will say that worldwide there's always a risk of this behaviour in custodial environments.
Really? We have to accept that. I mean,
no, I don't accept
the idea. Surely, the idea that you should treat people with respect, even if they're detainees, deportees, or prisoners, is absolutely fundamental to the way a company like yours should operate.
It is, and I challenge the use of the word "even" because for me, these are all vitally important individuals. It's what I've been doing for the past 35 years as a vocation. I believe very strongly in this. Now, you challenge me quite understandably, quite rightly on the worldwide comment, but that is a fact. It's my job to minimise it, drive it out and so forth. And I'm absolutely determined to do that.
It's just that people are going to look at the record and say, well, I imagine you were saying very similar things after the Medway case, if you were responsible at that stage or somebody on your behalf was. Why hasn't it changed now, given that we've had this history?
The vast majority of my staff do an incredibly good job in a very stressful, challenging and occasionally dangerous environment. And they will be as horrified and as disgusted as I am about this very small number of people.
So why didn't they report it? Why don't we know about this from other sources?
That's one of the questions. We have a very active whistleblowing line that we publicise, and I know it's used. Any whistleblowing allegation in my business stream does not come through me, quite rightly. It goes through our legal stream, who challenge, who examine it, and every quarter our ethics committee, chaired by the senior counsel, actually examines every one of those.
But why then does the whistleblower, in this case, wind up going to Panorama and not coming to the bosses?
I think you have to ask him that, what his motives are.
You must ask yourselves that too.
Of course I do.
It suggests that the people don't feel safe coming to you.
Well, I know that people do use that whistleblowing line. It is correct. It is properly organised. I wish he had done, because we could have addressed this 4 months previously and actually got into what are the causes, what are the outcomes, instead of waiting. The first allegation goes back to April. We're hearing about it now. I wish I'd known about that at the end of April, because I would have addressed it at the end of April.
Given the sort of problems that this area of your activity gives you, do you ever think of just walking away from it? I mean, you've got a huge business worldwide. Why stick with this?
That would have to be for other people in G4S, not me. From my perspective, I am incredibly proud of what we do. I've spent 35 years doing this as a prison governor, area manager, and in other roles. I'm actually very determined. I enjoy what I'm doing. I'm proud of what I'm doing, and I'll continue doing it whilst I am.
Just briefly to pick up on another of Danny's points, you will be continuing your tender to go on running this centre, will you?
Yes, we will.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, one of the people critical of not just G4S, but the whole Home Office approach to removing migrants, is the Labour MP Thangam Debonair, chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Refugees, who joins me now. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What do you make, firstly, of the Panorama report?
Well, I've just been trying to get on top of what's included in it, and I appreciate the clip that you played, but I think that we need to be really clear. This contract should be, in my view, suspended and reviewed. The Home Office needs to take responsibility for this. I think there's a risk here that we think the problems begin and end with individual people or individual companies, because this is part of a much wider problem. The use of detention, and let's be really clear, these are people who are not criminals. They are being detained, and the use of detention, unfortunately, over the last few years has, by the Home Office, become a port of first resort rather than last resort, as it's supposed to be. Now, the all-party panel from the APPG, the All-Party Group on Refugees, which which I chair, concluded in 2015 that the UK uses detention disproportionately and inappropriately, and we want there to be a time limit of 28 days for detention, and the Chief Inspector of Prisons at the time agreed with us.
Just before we explore some of those areas further, what's your reaction to what we've just heard from Mr. Petherwaite? Do you accept his assurances that they've been trying to get this right?
He sounded incredibly sincere, and I feel that that's got to be respected. However, management of an organisation sets the culture and the tone. If my staff do something wrong or treat my constituents badly, it's my responsibility. I'm the one who set the tone, and I'm sorry, but I think the management of G4S have got to take a long, cold, hard look at themselves, as, of course, have the Home Office, because they, in the end, are the ones who set the contract. That's your main beef, is it? You feel that the Home Office is, the culture of the Home Office is wrong, or it's just too ready to lock people up? There's various bits of it, but what's most pertinent to this case is they've chosen to use private companies more and more and more, and they've chosen, it's a policy of the Home Office, to use detention as a first resort rather than a last resort. Now, we also have compounding problems in that I, as an MP, about 50% of my casework is dealing with immigration cases, and that's partly because of the cuts to legal aid over the last few years. Now, these people in this case are people who've come to the end of the line. They're at a detention centre prior to removal. These may be people who actually have a legal claim to be here, which has not been properly assessed by the Home Office. I'm afraid I see that all too often. And that's what I'm afraid of, is that people are ending up in the detention centres like this, waiting for removal. They're frustrated, they're depressed, they've spent a long time perhaps in detention already, and that has a knock-on effect. Now, what we've got here is a culture of disbelief in the Home Office that leads to this, and we've also got a system of contracts, which means that G4S are allowed to be able to operate a contract. They're still operating that contract today. But nevertheless, if you are going to deport people, you are bound to have a little bit of this kind of thing going on, actually. If you're going to deport people, what I'm saying is that the problems start further back down the line. We've got a wider problem that leads to people being deported very often who should not be deported, or people who are being deported correctly. And of course, there will be people who are being deported correctly who are simply being kept in detention centres for far too long in completely inappropriate circumstances. And is there any reason to think that they could be better managed by the prison service or the Home Office itself rather than private companies? Well, I would like the entire process of assessing asylum to be radically overhauled, because I think that some of the problems that end up happening in detention centres and deportation centres, they are caused by problems way down the line from the way the Home Office assesses their cases. And at the moment, for instance, as an MP, I'm used to being able to pick up the phone and call the Home Office to find out what's going on with a particular case, but I've been told by email only this week that I'm not going to get a response until up to 20 days, that I'm not to use that phone line except within certain very restricted hours. Now, that means that I'm not able to advocate for people who may have a legal case to be here. If they then end up being deported and they're in a detention centre, it's no wonder that we've got difficulties. I do think, however, that G4S needs to take a very long, cold, hard look at what culture they are setting for their employees. Thank you, David. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And I should say we, of course, asked to speak to a minister, but we're told none was available. In a statement, the Home Office said it condemned actions that put detainees at risk and expected G4S to conduct a thorough investigation.